What if the material world, I mean, everything, the objects around you, space, time itself, is all just a mathematical manifestation?
What if matter is, for lack of a better word, an illusion?
Exactly. And that consciousness is the one true reality. We've got some heavy-duty sources to unpack this. Notebook LM hackers to synthesize everything from physics papers to texts from, thinkers like Einstein and Ruyer.
And this is a complete inversion of how science usually sees things.
It's a total flip.
For, a century? The main idea, especially in neuroscience, has been materialism. The brain comes first, and consciousness is just an emergent thing.
A side effect of meat, basically. A very complex calculation happening in our neurons.
Right. But this new hypothesis, it doesn't just treat consciousness as a feature. It treats it as the fundamental fabric of the universe. They call it universal consciousness, or phi.
And from that, everything else emerges. Space, time, matter.
It all comes from that foundational non-physical field. And I know it sounds like mysticism.
It does.
But the incredible part is that the model we're looking at, from physicist Maria Struemy, uses the really rigorous quantitative language of quantum field theory to lay it all out.
And that is the crucial distinction we have to make right up front. This isn't just philosophy. This is a formalized model published in a peer-reviewed journal, AIP Advances, back in 2025.
So let's get into it. Let's unpack that scientific claim. Consciousness as primary.
And Maria Struemy is, she's a fascinating person to propose this. She's an expert in nanomaterials at Uppsala University.
Meaning she deals with physical reality at the most, tiny technical scales.
Exactly. Yet her work suggests that all of that, space, time, particles, it's all just a projection, a kind of shadow cast by this universal field of consciousness.
It's a huge leap.
So if the brain isn't producing my consciousness, then what am I? What is this feeling of me thinking and perceiving right now?
In this framework, your individual consciousness isn't something your brain creates. It's understood as a, localized excitation within that universal field.
Okay, an excitation, like a ripple.
A ripple is a perfect analogy. Think of the universal field as this infinitely calm ocean of potential. Your subjective experience, my subjective experience, we're just temporary, coherent waves in that ocean.
It makes me think of quantum field theory. We don't really see electrons as tiny little balls anymore.
Right.
We see them as excited states of an underlying electron field that's, everywhere.
Precisely. And if you apply that same logic to consciousness, the universal consciousness field is the bedrock. Everything else, particles, space-time, you're all just emergent patterns or fluctuations within that substrate.
Which means the line separating you and me is...
It's fundamentally an illusion. Experiential, temporary, but not ultimately real.
That's a profound idea on its own. But okay, the biggest hurdle for a theory like this is always the same one. How do you get from a formless, unified field to this? To planets and people and atoms, to all this complexity?
That transition is the absolute core of Struemy's model. It's where the heavy math comes in. She calls the process differentiation, and it's governed by something she terms universal thought.
Universal thought. So it's an active principle.
Yes, it's a mathematical operator, T that imposes form and structure onto the raw potential of the universal field.
Okay, let's spend some real time on the mechanisms here. You mentioned there are three, and they draw from concepts we already know in physics. The first one is symmetry breaking.
Right. Symmetry breaking. It's a cornerstone of modern physics. We see it everywhere, from how a magnet works to how the fundamental forces of nature split apart right after the Big Bang.
So in this model, what is it breaking?
It's breaking the perfect unity of the universal field. That field starts in a state of maximum symmetry. It's perfectly uniform, undifferentiated potential. It's everywhere and nowhere at once.
And you can't have, things in a state of perfect symmetry.
You can't. To become matter, the system has to move away from that lowest energy unified state. The model uses scalar field potentials to describe this. Think of it like a landscape with hills and valleys.
Okay.
When the system falls into one of those valleys, the original symmetry is broken. And that break is what allows for distinct, separate forms to appear.
So symmetry breaking opens the door for things to exist. But what actually drives the creation, the variation?
That's mechanism number 2, quantum fluctuations.
Which we also know from cosmology, the seeds of galaxies.
Exactly. In the early universe, tiny quantum fluctuations in the vacuum energy are what provided the initial clumps of density that eventually grew into all the large-scale structures we see. Here, they play the same role. They're the creative force.
They introduce randomness.
Yes, random microscopic perturbations within the consciousness field. Without them, even if symmetry broke, Everything would be identical. The fluctuations are the source of novelty, of complexity.
So they generate the variety we see in the world.
From the shape of a coastline to the different types of atoms, yes. The model ties these fluctuations directly to the rate and variety of differentiation.
Okay, and the third one, projection-based selection. This sounds like it connects directly to the weirdness of quantum mechanics.
It absolutely does. It tackles the measurement problem head-on.
Which is, why does a particle that exists in a cloud of possibilities suddenly snap into one definite state the moment we look at it?
Right. Struemy suggests that the universal mind is in a constant state of introspection. It's observing its own infinite potential.
The universe is looking at itself.
Yes. And in her model, that act of looking is formalized using something called projection operators. These are specific mathematical tools in quantum mechanics that, when you apply them, force all that potential to collapse into one definite reality.
So our physical reality is the result of that collapse.
It's the selective action that reduces the infinite potential of the universal field into the finite defined state of our material world. Matter is the definitive answer to a question the universal mind is always asking itself.
Wow. If that holds up, it completely reframes the conversation. It brings modern physics into alignment with some very, very old philosophical traditions.
That convergence is maybe the most stunning part. You look at something like Advaita Vedanta, which teaches that Brahman, pure consciousness, is the ultimate reality, and the material world, Maya, is the illusion that emerges from it.
It's the same concept, just with different language.
It is. Struemy's physics provides the mathematical architecture for how that could happen, but she uses scalar fields and projection operators instead of Brahman and Maya. It suggests there's a universal truth there.
And this link, where abstract math meets these deep questions of existence, that brings us right to thinkers like Einstein and Raymond Ruyer. They really explored the human consequences of this idea, especially this illusion of separateness.
Einstein's words on this are just so powerful, and it's important to remember the context. This wasn't a public lecture. It was from a private letter he wrote in 1950. He was just reflecting on the human condition.
Right, let's get specific. He called the self an optical illusion. What did he really mean by that?
He said that a human being experiences themselves, their thoughts, their feelings, as something separated from the rest. He pinpointed that perceptual boundary and called it an optical illusion of his consciousness.
The word optical is so specific there. It's not a mistake. It's a distortion in how we see.
Like a mirage, exactly. It suggests our feeling of being an individual is a flaw in our perception, not a fundamental truth.
And if it's an illusion, what are the emotional consequences of living inside it?
He was incredibly direct about that. He called it a bondage or a prison. It traps us. It limits us to our own personal desires and our attachment to just a few people close to us.
So that feeling of being a separate self is what causes suffering.
He directly links it to suffering. The prison is psychological, but the chains are very real. And then he talks about the way out.
Through what he called true religion.
Yes, and this wasn't about conventional religion for him. It was a kind of cosmic spirituality.
Yeah.
He said the task of this true religion is the quest for liberation from this bondage.
So liberation isn't about improving your material life. It's about dissolving that psychological wall.
Precisely. By enlarging your circle of compassion to embrace all living things, all of nature. He explicitly says that's the path to achieving inner peace. He connects this cosmic, non-dual understanding directly to psychological well-being.
Which is, again, the core teaching of so many wisdom traditions. Suffering comes from the ego clinging to its separateness.
Exactly. And this idea, panpsychism, that consciousness is fundamental, it wasn't just Einstein. Erwin Schrödinger was another giant of physics who was on board.
One of the architects of quantum mechanics.
And he was very clear about it. He said science can never solve the problem of consciousness because consciousness is the presupposition of all science. Everything we do in science, measuring, calculating, hypothesizing, it's all happening inside consciousness to begin with.
You can't use the tool to explain the tool itself.
It's a cognitive catch-22. If consciousness is the instrument, it can't just be one of the things the instrument observes.
Which brings us to the French philosopher Raymond Ruyer. He came at this from a completely different angle, not physics, but biology. Specifically, how embryos develop.
Ruyer is so important here because he brings the argument out of the abstract and into observable living processes. He talked about the absolute domain of self-survey. A bit of a mouthful.
What does that mean, roughly?
It's primary consciousness.
Yeah.
The ability to just know yourself immediately. And he argued that this capacity can't wait for a complex brain to develop. It has to be there from the very beginning.
Even in the basic building blocks of life.
Yes. And his star witness was the embryo, because it shows this unbelievable capacity for auto-formation, for self-organization.
How does that prove anything about consciousness, though?
Well, think about how plastic an embryo is. If you take a developing salamander embryo and you, say, remove some cells or even rearrange them, what happens?
I would assume it develops with defects.
You'd think so.
Ah.
But often, the remaining cells compensate. They reorganize themselves to still produce a perfectly normal salamander. It actively resists being messed with. It seems to have a goal.
It knows what it's supposed to become.
It knows what it's supposed to become. That active, goal-oriented drive toward a specific form, that, for Ruyer, is primary subjectivity in action. It's not just a dumb machine following a program.
So for him, this primary consciousness has to do two things at once. This self-forming activity.
A dual role, yes. First, it's a force liante, a binding or cohesive force. It's what holds the whole system together, whether it's an atom or an organism, and stops it from just falling apart into a heap of separate parts.
The glue.
The glue.
Yeah.
And the second role is connaissance, which is knowledge. The internal understanding, the blueprint of the form it needs to realize. The cohesive force holds it together. The knowledge guides the construction.
It's really incredible how his biological concept, a cohesive force plus inherent knowledge, maps almost perfectly onto Ström's physics model, the universal field differentiating via universal thought.
The symmetry is striking. It's like 21st century physics is rediscovering the philosophical conclusions of the 20th century. Ruyer believed it was space-time that thinks through these primary activities.
So now we have to pivot. We've been talking about these profound, rigorous ideas, but we have to address the difficult environment this information is landing in. Which brings us to our third section, scientific literacy and the need for context.
And this is maybe the most important real-world piece of the puzzle. We've just discussed a very sophisticated, mathematically grounded paper. But it exists in a world where public trust in science is, frankly, falling apart.
So we have to be able to tell the difference between a rigorous challenge to the status quo and just misinformation.
We have to. Let's look at the data, specifically from a survey of French youth, which I think reflects a global trend. In 1972, 55% of young people believed science brought more good than harm.
And today?
Today, that number has crashed to 33%, a huge drop. And the number who think science is actually more harmful has nearly tripled. There's a deep skepticism, a defensiveness toward the scientific consensus.
And when trust goes down, something else has to fill that vacuum. What does the data show about belief in, let's call them, counter-truths?
It shows a major break from established facts. A staggering 69% of 18 to 24-year-olds in that survey believe in at least one theory that is completely rejected by scientific consensus.
69%. That's more than 2/3. What kind of beliefs are we talking about?
It's the big ones. 27% believe in creationism over evolution. And then you get into basic physics. 16% believe the Earth is flat.
16%.
And 20% believe the moon landing was a hoax. These aren't small disagreements. These are rejections of fundamental, observable reality.
And there has to be a link to the way information is consumed now. The role of social media must be huge.
It's a key factor. The study found a direct correlation. 74% of daily TikTok users believe in at least one of these counter-scientific ideas.
74%.
The algorithms on these platforms are designed for engagement, not accuracy. They create echo chambers. If you show a little interest in a conspiracy, it feeds you more, and very quickly it starts to feel normal.
Which puts a huge burden on you, the listener. You hear about Ström's model, which sounds radical, and then you see a slick video from an influencer about flat Earth. Both are saying the experts are wrong. How do you tell them apart?
The difference has to be methodological rigor. It's the only reliable metric. Maria Struemy's work is in a peer-reviewed journal. It's built on advanced math quantum field theory projection operators. To argue with her, you have to engage with that math.
You have to do the work. You can't just have an opinion.
You have to do the work, whereas pseudosciences rely on a totally different kind of validation.
Charisma, popularity.
Exactly. They use simple beliefs, anecdotes, emotion, and the aura of the influencer. The survey found that 49% of young people think astrology is a science. Not because of peer-reviewed data, but because it's accessible and it feels personal.
So in one world, validation comes from rigorous proof and peer review. In the other, it comes from subscriber counts and likes.
That's the challenge for all of us now. We have to learn to evaluate the method behind a claim, not just how novel or exciting the claim sounds. Ström's model is rigorous, even if provocative. Flat Earth theory is just noise, no matter how popular it gets.
So bringing this all together, the physics from Ström, the philosophy from Einstein and Ruyer, it leaves us with this powerful, unified idea about our own lives.
It really does. Whether you fully accept that consciousness is the foundation or you stick with the materialist view, you can't ignore the implications. That persistent, nagging feeling of being a separate, isolated person, it's profoundly challenged by every source we've looked at.
So the anxiety and suffering that comes from feeling alone, it's all based on a misperception.
It's the greatest optical illusion of the individual mind, just as Einstein said. If the fundamental reality is shared and unified and conscious, then our intense focus on being separate individuals is, well, it's just misplaced.
It changes how you see every single interaction. Am I a separate little machine, or am I a momentary wave in a single infinite conscious ocean?
The evidence we've discussed today, both from physics and philosophy, it strongly suggests the latter is a much better description of reality.
This has been a deep dive. If you gained some new insight today, please consider sharing this with someone you think would benefit from being more informed.
We hope you'll help us reach 2,000 subscribers.
And we'll leave you with this to think about. If the fundamental reality really is this self-forming conscious activity, as suggested by both Ström's math and Ruyer's biology, does our modern obsession with purely physical mechanisms, with just looking at neurons, actually distract us from truly understanding the cohesive, intelligent world we're a part of? Thanks for listening to Le Podcast de Philippe.